That's right.
Welcome to uh, Universal God Message of Peace, and my name is Lee Weissman, and this is Khalid Zahir, Dr. Khalid Zahir, and today we're talking about the art of argument, and our kind of format. Somehow or another, we kind of worked it out this way. Is I kind of give a kind of a Jewish perspective, so to speak, on the topic, and then Dr. Zahir will ask some questions, and next week you'll get his presentation and get questions from me, and then the conversation goes on. That's kind of how we've been working. So it's my turn today, so I'll try to do the best I can. Okay, are you ready? Got your seatbelt on? Okay. So as always, I think whenever I talk to Dr. Zahir, I'm always going back to the creation of the world. I don't know why that is. You inspired me to go back to the creation of the world. So we know that the world was created. The Torah says, and it's in the Quran as well, that the world is created by language. That God spoke and the world leapt into being. So speaking. The idea of speaking, and obviously when we talk about God, obviously we're not talking about physical speaking in the way that we speak, right? It's a way of speaking about how it is that God relates to the creation, but speech is one of the most powerful is the most powerful faculty that human beings have exclusively. There are no other animals, right? There are no other animals that have speech. And in fact, right, this is emphasized in the Torah. In the Torah, you know, poor Adam, right? Poor Adam looks around the world and he wonders, who am I ever going to have a mate? Right? And he looks at all the animals and everything else. They have mates and everything else. And he looks and he wonders if maybe one of them could be, what does he know? He's just born. And says, so what does God say? God says, your job is to name the animals. So by naming the animals, when he names the animals, by naming things in the world, he demonstrates that he has an ability that no other creature has. No other creature has this. And we know how powerful speech is. We know how powerful speech is. We can destroy a person. We can destroy a person's reputation. We can destroy a person's sense of self with one little stroke of the tongue. And at the same time, we can also build up. We can build up, and we can enliven a person also with one single stroke of our tongue. We know how powerful speech is, even from the very beginning of creation. This is a unique human faculty, and it's possible to use it well, and it's also possible not to use it well. And if I had to pick one topic to talk about, so if you were to invite me to speak anywhere, the one topic I would most want to talk about is this topic today, because in the world that we live today, the question of how to disagree with one another has become the single most important question that there is. And I say that because disagreement is a path to truth. Disagreement is a way to arrive at truth. And very strongly believe that only when people have the ability to disagree with each other can we find the kinds of ideas and solutions that the world so desperately needs. And as long as we are unable to disagree with each other, right? As long as everybody sort of walks away from disagreements instead of and retreats to their corner where everybody agrees with them, as long as that's happening, there's going to be no creativity in the world and nothing is going to get solved. So I find this to be very important in terms of the world that we live in. It's also very important for our peace of mind as human beings, as members of as members of families, as members of communities, it's really important to be able to learn how to do this. So I'll start. I'm very happy to be talking about it, and it's very uh, very important. So there's a beautiful statement of the rabbis of the first century that says that there are two kinds of arguments. There are two kinds of arguments. The word is machloket, which means literally a kind of separation. There are two kinds of arguments. There are arguments, the shem shamayim, that are in this for the sake of heaven, and there are arguments which are not for the sake of heaven. And it says arguments which are for the sake of heaven, they endure. And I'll talk about what that means. And arguments which are not for the sake of heaven, they do not endure. Strange language. First of all, what does it mean for the sake of heaven? So an argument that is for the purpose of truth, the argument that is for the purpose of truth, that the goal of the argument is the purpose of truth, that if this is that we are serving God by seeking truth through argument, says that endures, meaning that produces a permanent positive result. That produces a permanent positive result. If we're able to have, if we have the right attitude, if we have the right attitude, we have the right motivations, and we're genuinely seeking truth, then our disagreement that can be a path to enduring truth. On the other hand, if it is not the Shem Shemayim, if there is some other reason, right, than truth, and there are many other reasons why people argue and disagree, right, then that argument will never lead to anything that is of lasting value. Nothing. It cannot lead to anything of lasting value. And it gives an example. It says, so what's an example of L'Shem Shemayim? And says the argument between two Jewish schools, Hillel and Shammai, and I'll explain that in a second, and says, what is an example of not for the sake of heaven? Says that's the argument between Moses and Korach, right? Karun, I think is how he's referred to in the Quran. So let me talk about Hillel and Shammai. So the Hillel and Shammai were two rabbis who lived in the first century, and they had two different academies, right? They had two different academies, the madrasas, and they each one had their own madrasa, right? Beit Midrash, that's the word related to madrasa. And they had their students, and they disagreed on many legal points. They disagreed on many legal points. And they had different approaches to law, honestly. They had slightly different approaches to law, partially based on the different personalities. Hillel tended to be more lenient. Shammai tended to be less lenient. Hillel tended to be more kind of optimistic about people's motivations, and Shammai tended to be less optimistic about people's motivations. And those created significant differences in their understanding of Jewish law. And for 3 years, these two schools debated on a daily basis. Okay, there was debating, and these debates got hot. I mean, there's no question that debates got hot. We know that they got very hot. And in the end, right? In the end, the rabbis said, the law is going to go according to the opinion of Hillel. The law will go according to the opinion of the school of Hillel. But Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. He says, both these and these are the word of the living God. Okay, so what are they saying? They're saying, look, both of these schools are right. They're both right, right? They're both right. But they're coming from different perspectives, right? They're using slightly different methodologies. And if you use different methodologies, I imagine it's a little bit, for my Muslim friends, a little bit like the madhabs, right? By using different methodology, you come to different conclusions. It doesn't mean the other conclusions are wrong. It means that the other conclusions are different, that the other conclusions are different. Now, okay, so what's two questions? First of all, what was L'Shem Shamayim about this process? How do we know it was L'Shem Shamayim? How do we know that it was for the sake of heaven, that it was for the sake of truth? And second, if both of these opinions were true and correct, then why did we say that the law goes according to Hillel? So the rabbis answer like this, and it's a great thing. It says, what's so great about this? What's so great about this is that through all of this period of argument, they never stopped marrying their daughters to each other. Right? And that sounds like, okay, that sounds minor, but it's not minor at all. Right? It's not minor at all. It means that they maintained social relationships. They didn't break with each other because they had it. They didn't take it to the personal level. They didn't take it to the personal level. They didn't make it ad hominem. They didn't make it so that, oh, I can't possibly marry those people. I can't marry my daughter one of those people. Those people are all messed up, right? They got all wrong opinions. They got all wrong opinions. They're messed up. And some of those opinions had to do with marriage, by the way. Right. So there were different issues about marriage. And they said, we're not going to put ourselves, even though we disagree with them, we're not going to put ourselves in a position where we're going to say we're not going to marry them anymore. Right. Where we're going to cut off those kinds of social relationships, because those social relationships are really, really important. It's really important for people to be able to relate to each other as family. Right. So we're not going to say that they're not family anymore. Good. That's on both sides. But then why favor Hillel? So the rabbis say it was because of the way that the disciples of Hillel were trained to argue. They had a special quality about their argument. They would always state the opinion of their opponent, Shammai, first. So imagine, right? Imagine how discussions went. So they would start out by saying, you Shammaites, you believe the following. And they would explain, they'd say, okay, you believe this, 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 and this. Have I got it right? Right? They have the opportunity. They'd give them the opportunity to say, do I have it right? Right? And if I had made a mistake in my representation, or if I had skewed the representation in some kind of way, the Shammaites would come to me and they would say, no, you got that wrong. You're misrepresenting. Let me explain. Right? So they would wait. They would make sure that they had carefully explained the position of the other side first, and then they would offer their argument. And so in the merit of that, not in the merit of their conclusion, but in the merit of the virtue of their method of argumentation, they're rewarded. They're rewarded with the legal status, right? That their rulings become law because of the way that they argue. And to me, this is a very deep lesson. So often when people argue, when people discuss, they misrepresent the arguments of their opponents. And sometimes it's on purpose, sometimes by mistake. Very often, I think they just don't necessarily understand They don't necessarily understand, and they don't give an opportunity they don't give an opportunity for themselves to understand the position of the other person. And they don't show respect, right? There's no disrespect. If I say, okay, and it's very subtle, by the way. Okay, you can show disrespect very easily, right? It's very simple to show disrespect. When I was in graduate school, they used to have these weekly meetings. Um, and there was one professor, and he would sit like this during every lecture. We'd have visiting lectures, and he would sit like this. Already, right? You knew he was trouble, right? Because he sat like that. Okay, and this was exactly the look that he had. Okay, like this, and he'd go like this the entire time, right? And then at the end, he would go, and the person would address him, Professor so and so, and he would go, "What you're merely saying is that," right? And he would make that whatever it was the person said. This could be like a Nobel Prize winner. It doesn't matter. But just by saying, "You're merely saying," right? He made it sound like the person was insignificant and what he had said was insignificant. Right? It's very, very easy to do, right? It's very easy to do. Just like it'd be very easy not to cross your arms, right? To sit, right? To sit openly and to say, wow, what you said is really interesting, and then add your idea, right? It's these are very simple, they're very simple techniques, but to be aware, right? To be aware of the ways that we argue and to is really something which is very, very important, because otherwise there's no truth. And particularly, um, Rabbi Nosson of Breslov, a uh, famous Jewish mystic, wrote an 8-volume book. That's right there, 8-volume book. And somebody asked him, he says, that's a very long book. He says it was almost 16 volumes. And he said, like, well, 16 volumes. What were the extra 8 volumes about? He said the extra 8 volumes were on nitzachon, on the desire to win. He says, because I have found that the single biggest obstacle to truth is the desire to win. The moment you're in a discussion and your goal is to win, the truth is out the window. At that point, there's no question of truth, right? If truth is found in those circumstances, it's completely by accident, right? Of course it can happen, right? We could stumble, we could stumble on truth. They say, even a blind squirrel stumbles across an acorn once in a while. It's possible that we could stumble upon a truth, but we would be very unlikely to get there. Very, very unlikely to get there, because uh, because what we really want is we just want to win, and we'll say anything. I mean, people, and I can say from my own personal experience, if I'm involved in an argument and I just want to win, I will say anything, whether it's true, whether it's not true, whether it's half true. I wouldn't say something that's not true. I'd say something that maybe not so true, right? In order to win. And so we'll have to be very, very, very careful. Especially today, we face also very big challenges when it comes to social media and things like that, because uh, if I'm speaking here with Dr. Zahir, here I am with my face, with my name, right? With my reputation, I have to behave a little bit. I have to behave a little bit. But put me on the internet, right? And change my name uh, you know, Maccabee warrior or whatever you want to call me, right? Change my name to, uh, God's warrior, and I can, and I can say whatever I want, right? I can say whatever I want, and people, and we see that people really lose it becomes only about winning. Becomes only about winning, and of course, we don't see a lot of truth coming out of those discussions. We don't see any truth coming out of those discussions. Those discussions tend to devolve into personal attacks and so on, and are not good for us, not good for society, not good for our brains, and not good for our families, not good for anybody. So um, I think that's the basic outline, is to really avoid nitzachon, to avoid this desire to be right, to be careful in the ways we argue, to really genuinely seek truth, right? To really genuinely be truth seekers, and in that, um, not to forget the things that we know about being decent people. I think that, we all know how to be decent people, right? I think you said it very nicely. I'm trying to remember how you put it. There are things which come from the book, right? There are things which come from the book, and things which don't come from the book. We know them, right? They're part of all human beings know them. We know how to be decent people. But when those desires kick in to be right, we forget, right? We forget how to be, how to speak with gentleness and simplicity. We forget, we forget to pause, and to listen and to pay attention and to try to understand the position of the other person. Um, and we know all those things, and that's part of character building, right? That's part of character building. That's part of purification of the heart. All of those lessons, when does the, as we say, the pedal hit the metal, right? When do we most need them? When we're in the middle of an argument, right? When we're with people who agree with us, it's easy, right? It's so easy to be nice. It's simple, you know. It's very easy. When we're in a room full of people who agree with us, who look like us, who act like us, everyone else, they got the same beards, the same hats. Hey, it's easy, right? Simple, no problem, right? But if we're with people who don't agree with us, then all of a sudden people forget everything that they know about etiquette and respect. But that's when you most need it. That's when you most need it. Don't lose your character. Don't lose your character when you most need it, right? So that's my message. And I'm open for questions, comments,
Thank you very
disagreements.
much. Thank you very much, Rabbi Wiseman. Briefly about something you promised towards the beginning of your presentation, the communication between Moses and Korah. You didn't refer
Ah,
to it.
thank you very much. See, I skipped that. Thank you very much. So the Korach thing is very interesting. So, um, so the first one, Hillel and Shammai, seems clear. So between Korach and Moshe, and Korach and Moses, um, it's an interesting. So the problem is that there's a case of where the argument is not really about what he claims it's about. And which is a clear case of an argument which is not for the sake of heaven, is when the argument is not really about what you're saying it's about. So he comes to Moses, and he says, you know what? Why are you making yourself above everybody else? Why are you making yourself above everybody else? Really, the whole congregation, everybody here is holy, right? They could all be prophets too, and you're no better than anybody else, and all of and that's his argument. In reality, what he's saying is, you know what? I come from the very same family you do. Okay? I have exactly the same lineage as you have. Says, why is it you and not me? Why is it your brother and not me? Right? And why is it the argument is not wrong, right? The argument he made, right? The argument he made and So imagine Moses's lieutenant, his closest his closest assistant, Yehoshua, Joshua, comes to him and says, and says, this is, horrible. There are people who are prophesying. He says, well, okay, then everybody should be a prophet. I have no problem with that. I have no problem. I have no problem. If everybody wants to be holy, they want to be a prophet. I have no problem with that. That's great. He says, let him. He says, but that wasn't the argument, right? That wasn't the argument. The argument was really me, right? In the form of a kind of an intellectual argument. And that happens, of course, so often, and we have to have, I think, just to say, I'll tell a personal story if you don't mind. We have to have compassion with that sometimes, because there's sometimes people can't speak their mind. They can't speak their heart, so they argue about something else because they just can't. I was teaching once, and I had a student who actually was heckling me, like it was really giving me a hard time, and it was just interrupting me, and I couldn't understand like what problem they had, and the arguments just didn't make any sense. Like the arguments, like so finally at the end of class, I called the kid out, and I said, listen, what's really bothering you? I had this voice in my head that said, like, ask this kid, like, what's bothering him? I said, what's bothering you? Why are you so, there's an anger here. I don't understand. There's something bothering you. And so he tells me the story that his mother was very sick, and she became very religious in her last days, and she passed away. And the rabbi asked him to pray for his mother, but he felt very angry at God because his mother had become religious, and still she died, and whatever. And like, okay, that the argument was never about anything I was teaching. The argument was his own inner struggles, right? His own inner struggles. So that's the case. But in the case of Korach, it's not about inner struggle. It's about misrepresenting your motives. Right. So if you're not even going to admit what it is you're talking about, okay, what we're really talking about, it says, then that's a very big problem. Thank you. I left that out.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Wiseman. It really was very interesting. And I mean, I have to tell you that I couldn't have agreed with you more on this point, that this one single matter, to me as well, is the most important of all. And honestly, no matter how long we talk about it, on how many occasions, it would not be enough. Because I absolutely agree with you that many problems of humans are because of not properly understanding this area. One of the things that I keep wondering, it's not easy. I mean, because it's the most important area where humans ought to improve and be as good as possible. Because in doing it properly lies our success as human beings living with each other. Therefore, I think it's difficult. I mean, let's face it, it's not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about its virtues, but when it comes to me practicing it, I'll find it difficult. So one of the things that comes to my mind is that, I mean, if I was to get engaged in a debate with somebody else, there is that heat of the moment. And, you do tend to get carried away. I think there are two things, at least to begin with, that come to my mind, which we ought to keep into account in order to be on the right course. One is, even before we start a discussion, if we realize and imagine that the person or group of people that we are talking to uh, have a different point of view, a very different from ours. I have a feeling that the more it's difficult as far as positions are concerned to reconcile, the more it is important that we be polite and be as decent and selective, careful in the choice of words as possible. So that initial realization, I think, would go a long way in helping us in coming up with a decent discussion. And then while discussing, you know, as and when we find that our temper is threatening to have the better of us, uh, we need to keep reminding ourselves, you know, be calm, be polite, focus on arguments and understanding, and don't lose your temper, because that's where uh, it all starts. That's where I think we begin to fail. I also have a couple of more points, but if you would want me to say them now, or you would want to comment on what I've said.
Well, let me. Yeah, first of all, that that all makes a tremendous a tremendous amount of sense. It's interesting how how much of your character is challenged in these situations. If you're looking for if you want, you know, we when women get married, we say, and in Hebrew they say you look for three different things. It says kos, kas, kis. So one of those is not going to apply. One of those is not going to apply to Muslims. I'm sorry. Okay, so kos means it means a cup. Yeah, you see how a person drinks. If they drink alcohol, you see how they behave, right? If they drink and they behave badly, forget it. Okay, because kis means their pocketbook, their pocket. It means how they deal with money. And lastly, kas, anger, right? That is how a person deals with with feelings of anger is like very, very fundamental. It says a lot about who they are. It says a lot about, and you know, it, it it is like I think one of the single most uh the single most universal challenges in when it comes to character is how do you deal, right? How do you deal with your anger? And we all experience it. I mean, it's it's normal. It's part of human life. It's there's no avoiding it, you know. A- and how do we deal with it? How do we, uh, are we able to are we able to back out? When we sort of drilled ourselves into a hole, are we able to back out? And say, okay, I just took the wrong approach. Let me back out of that. And the, all of those things are really important. I think it really is a huge. It's a huge test of character, and our ability at self-regulation, like being able to regulate. But you know, that's also religion. I mean, right? We're, you know, if religion isn't doing that for us, then if it's not religious, it means we're doing something wrong, right? If it's not helping us to deal with other people and deal with other people, even in a broader way, people who are not like us, then it's not doing its job. Something's not working.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Remember I mentioned in one of my earlier presentations, uh, when I was talking about the others, and I mentioned the problem that many of us Muslims have in understanding the proper true meanings of the word kafir and
Mm.
expression kufr. You know, I quite often um, try to understand um, my faith, belief, uh, in the light of what's happening around me. I think it's probably something that everyone has to do with a thinking mind. You
Mhm.
know, I have come up with an understanding of the metaphysical explanation of what this world is all about. And what I'm experiencing has to fit into it. So, I quite often ask myself, and obviously, when I read the Quran, I have got to ask myself that when I believe it to be God's word, and God seems to be very upset, angry with kafirs, uh, uh, I ask myself, well, what is wrong with them? I mean, what is the problem that is upsetting the Almighty?
Mhm.
And each time I try to probe and find out the answer within myself, I come to this conclusion that he's upset at the fact that there is somebody out there who knows the truth quite clearly from inside, and yet he's not prepared to accept it. Now, when that conclusion is drawn, then I can't stop myself from asking, uh, then whoever does this wrong is doing something seriously problematic. And this point of mine comes back to what you were saying. You're talking to each other. Uh, Try to see what the other person is saying, and whether what he is saying is making sense. I mean, if you've already determined what the conclusion is, as you mentioned about the gentleman, who would sit like this and just look at the other person
Mhm.
through his expressions and gestures, he's creating this impression that, I mean, sorry, I don't accept what you're saying, even before you started speaking.
Right.
So this, I mean, I'm reminded of, I mentioned it, I think, before, and this is something important. What Imam Shafi'i, one of the great jurists, said, that I do believe that my understanding is correct, but I concede the possibility that it could be wrong. And do understand that what the other person believes in, accepts is wrong, but I do concede the possibility that he may turn out to be right. If that's not the case, then there is no discussion that can take place. I mean, I would not even listen to you,
Right.
because I'm already convinced that I'm right and you're wrong. I think that's one of the problems.
Right. If you, first of all, I love that. I love that quote. I actually used to have that quote above my desk, uh, uh, because if exactly if you're not prepared, I always say this about people who are involved in interfaith dialogue. You know, people ask me, "Oh, I want to be, I want to know, should I be doing interfaith dialogue?" I said, "Look, I said it depends. Are you prepared to actually learn something?" says are you prepared to actually learn something, and are you prepared for it to actually change you? Because if you're not prepared for it to actually change you, and if you're not prepared to actually learn anything, then there's no point in it. That there's no point in it. There's a there's a, if it's not going to if you're just showing up to say what you want to say, and you're not prepared to get something from it, then okay, then there's no point. And that's I think that a lot of I think a lot of I think a lot of things are like that. And people who are truly wise, I mean, Shafi is a good example. Some people who are really wise are able to learn from the people who disagree with them. And anybody you'll see that if you look at the writings of people who are really wise, you'll see that they've very consistently learned from people who have disagreed with them. And and even people who disagree with them vehemently, even the most vehement disagreements, you know, they say, well, no, okay, good point. Just being able to say that. But I love your point, actually. I think that that's a really good point. That it's I have to really think about this too, because we have this word kofir also you know, and it has this very, with all the negative things, and you know, and you think, and what is it that God hates so much about it? I think no, I think you hit it, and I think it's much easier to do than you think, you know? I mean, because what I described with Korach is really a kind of, you know, I'm saying one thing, you know, I'm saying one thing, but I really know the truth. Okay. I know, right? Says I understand. I see that Moses is the messenger of God. Okay. I can see these messengers. I see what's going on here. I was there at Mount Sinai. I saw all that. But like I'm, you know, but I'm not accepting that reality. I'm not accepting that. Instead, I'm going to insist on this. And that is, yeah, I think that that's very powerful. And so so every time that that you're making an argument for the sake of winning, and you know you're not right, says that's really a kind of kufr. You know,
Right,
that's really
right.
that's really a displeasing thing. And I think that's a great point.
And
That's
it's a matter of serious concern, honestly. I want myself to be reminded about it. And honestly, I want to remind others about it as well. And I think I mentioned it sometime earlier about this famous economist John Maynard Keynes. He became so famous that his contemporaries they were jealous of him, which is what quite often happens. So one of their allegations against Keynes was that he continues to shift. He doesn't have one opinion on one topic. He changes. So he was once confronted by somebody, and he was asked, "What is your problem? I mean, your contemporaries they have this complaint against you that you keep changing." His response was very interesting. He said, "You see, the problem is when I have new information and new facts, and I see my understanding in the light of those facts, and I realize that I was wrong, I change. My question is, what exactly those others who are accusing me of changing, what exactly do they do when they find new facts coming their way? They stick to their guns. So
right.
yes, I mean, I'm sure this is a problem that people tend to stick to their guns. But Rabbi, I would want to mention two more things that I want your comments on. One is that honestly, my understanding is my based on my own experience and based on what I see others doing, that it is relatively easier for you to be an open-minded person discussing matters with another person like I am doing with you.
Mhm.
But if I was to be accompanied by other fellow Muslims, and you were to be accompanied by other fellow Jews, then forget about it. This Khalid Zahir may not be the same person because
Yeah.
he has a pressure of others. That's one big problem, and I want your perspective on that.
Yeah. My first response is just to scream loudly. No, no, I mean, yeah, that's true. I mean, that's true. There's, you know, uh, yeah, um, yeah. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's simply true. Um, and not only that, but I mean, honestly, um, you know, first of all, here's the thing, interfaith dialogue is a lot easier than intrafaith dialogue sometimes because the the s- the stakes feel different. It's sort of like if I'm arguing with a fellow Jew about something, it's like, well, you know, you're misrepresenting the Torah, you are misrepresenting this. You know, it becomes it's the feel as the stakes are hard. But yeah, there is that kind of pressure of the community. You know, there's an expression, the world, and the world. Who's the world? The world is like the four people, or whoever they are, right?
Yeah.
Who might decide that they're the arbiters of what I say and what I do. Yeah, that's true. Um, that's definitely challenging because we live in communities. We live in communities of scholarship, communities, and there's always you know there's there's always that pressure, um, and you know that very often I get things. Well, why didn't you say, why didn't you say this, or why didn't you say that?
That's right.
And if they were sitting here with me right now, I'm sure I'd be getting that on both sides, like whispering in my ear.
And you rightly said, it's unfortunately the mentality, the psyche is, we've got to win it. I mean, we have got to win the debate.
Right,
Uh, it's
right,
it's more of a competition. The other thing that what I feel is quite often a very serious obstacle in the manner that we talk to each other, whether fellow believers or somebody belonging to another religious tradition. We we doubt the sincerity of the other person. Uh, Somehow there is this feeling that, you know, Rabbi Lee Wiseman knows that what I'm saying is right. He knows it deep down, but he doesn't want to admit.
right.
So, so the starting point is, incorrect, is problematic. But I don't imagine that you are an honest person, you are intellectually honest. How can I have a proper, reasonable, genuine discussion with you? I can't.
Yeah, I used to tell my students this. I used to tell my students this. So when you're having an argument with somebody, pretend, okay, pretend that they are intelligent, right? That they are intelligent and they are moral. Says, okay, pretend, even if you don't believe it, even if you don't believe it, okay, for the sake of argument, for the sake of your being a decent person in the argument, okay, you pretend that these people, right, that the person is moral and the person is intelligent. Chances are that they probably are, right? Chances are they probably are. Okay. But for whatever reason, maybe you don't believe that right now. Okay. Whatever, but you know what? When you're talking to them, talk to them like a person who's intelligent. Don't assume that they're stupid, right? And don't assume that they're immoral. Don't assume that they're liars, right? And I think that when people communicate like that, they communicate much better. It really is, and again, could you be wrong? Is it possible the person is a liar? Sure. Is it possible the person is that the person is stupid? Yeah, sure, it's possible, right? But that's not where you want to start out. You don't want to end up being this guy, you know. You don't want to be, being this guy, you
I
know.
know. That's
Eh,
right.
it's very easy. It's very easy to do, but really to, consider the sincerity of the other person that, uh I it's funny. I think being a teacher, you kind of go through this a lot. I remember I taught something and my students just didn't get it. They just didn't get it. And I went home and I was talking to my wife and I was complaining about it. And she said, "Well, maybe you're not such a great teacher." I was like, at first I was very angry. I was very angry. And I said, "What are you saying? Like, what kind of thing is that to say?" And I got very angry. She said, "Well, if you're saying that nobody understood it, right, then maybe you didn't explain it well." And I thought, oh, I said, that that makes perfect sense, right? There, you know, there, it's much more likely that I didn't explain it well than they're all stupid. right? So if I'm sitting for a room of people and they're not understanding me, right? I shouldn't assume that they're stupid. I should assume that I'm not explaining myself well,
Yeah,
right? Um, so I think that's
right.
it's a good it's a good insight.
And just one more point I think that we'll be able to discuss. Uh, it's again a kind of a mental psychological exercise which somebody mentioned, and I think it's a very wise thing to say, although very difficult to practice, but nonetheless very important to do. When you are talking to me about something wherein I disagree with you, and you have a different understanding, uh, I should ideally imagine that I have no point of view,
Mm.
that I am blank, and I empathize with you and imagine that what you're saying is right and start appreciating it. People say, how can you do it? I tell them you can do it. And then after your mind has captured it, bring in your own understanding. I think then it would be a genuine effort to understand what the other person is saying. Otherwise, you know what's going to happen, which is quite often what happens, that while you're talking to me, I'm already preparing a rebuttal. And I'm saying that let him stop. And the moment he stops, my barrage, of arguments would be thrown at him. So I think that's a very important exercise that needs to be practiced.
That is so true. Uh, Again, when I was a teacher, somebody would be talking and a student would put up their hand, right? Put up their hand. And I would say to the students, put down your hand. Okay, put down your hand and open up your ears because I know that now the only thing you're thinking about is what you want to say, right? Once you put your hand up, oh, I want to say something. And that's exactly right. So that's a great exercise. I don't know if I can do it. I have to think, I'd be honest. I'm not sure I can do it. But if I could do it, it'd be a great exercise. So it's just sort of sit and not be preparing the rebuttal, not preparing kind of like my take on it as it's unfolding, but to kind of wait and say, okay, let's just blank slate, listening, taking it in, then processing, then responding. That would be cool track.
I mean, it is probably if I was to talk about an example, uh, I mean, there is a large population of the world that are Christians, and they believe Jesus to be the Son of God, and they believe in Trinity, something that I don't accept. But while talking to a Christian, I should keep asking myself, I mean, this man believes it.
Yeah,
Let me try to understand it.
yeah,
I mean, give him a chance.
yeah,
So if I'm not doing it, then I'm actually not talking to him. I'm not communicating with him,
right. Well, you're
making life difficult.
right, right. You're doing something, but you're not. No, it's true. And being able to sit and I'll eh, in our private chat, I'll share an interesting story about that.
Right.
But because that's a really hard one, right? That's a really good example. It's a really hard one because my my theological brain just shuts down, and but
Yeah.
okay, so but this person really believes this, and this is like a reality for them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like to assume that I understand it also. Like I'll share something when with you privately, but to assume that I always think I understand it, but then somebody says something and says, oh, I did not understand how they understood it.
Yeah.
Like I I did not understand how they thought it, and it was very it it changed my way of thinking about it. So So I think we're up to time now.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Okay.
fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. And Lolly will sign us out in recording. And thank you so much.
Thank you
And
very much for your presentation.
okay.
It was
And
really
thank
good.
you. Next week I sit back and I listen. It's going to be great. Okay. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye. Salam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Bye.